Hey everybody, welcome back to Journey to VR. For my Friday favorite post this week, I wanted to answer a question that recently came up on YouTube. One of our users asked about the SVG importer and how I was working with it to get the Urban logo and being successful with it. So I figured I'd share with you a few tips and tricks in both Illustrator and Maya on how I created that Urban logo. So you'll notice if we look at the wire version of this guy, it's obviously a lot of information. There's tons of different little line work that's been done to give us all these offset strokes. So if I tried to bring all that into Maya, obviously that's just going to be a ton of geometry to play around with, and it's not going to be really easy to work with. So my approach was to isolate the black background from the white foreground and then capture all that little line and stroke work in the form of a texture map that you guys have seen before on Journey to VR that's just simply projected back on top of the SVG imported geometry. So pretty straightforward stuff. But step one is isolating the background objects from the foreground objects. So how do you do that? Well, you do it in Illustrator by creating a new layer and then just selecting the objects that you want to become your foreground. So I'm going to add in a few of these objects here. I think I added about 10 of these in ultimately in the file that I used in the demo. But you just grab a few of those guys. Then you can click on this little square and just drag and drop that up onto the new layer. So now if we look in our wire mode on this guy, you can see that's going to be the foreground geometry, essentially. And what we want to do is just make sure that all this stuff has a white shader assigned to it. So we'll just go ahead and we'll grab that guy and we'll just add a white material to that. So now if we look at the background objects here, you can see that basically we still have all that extra line work and junk inside of there. And I don't want to bring all that into from Illustrator into Maya and extrude all that. That's not going to really work out very well. So what I want to do is kind of compress this all down into one single object or a single object that's the main body with then all the little floating things kind of off in space doing their own thing. So how do you do that? It's really, really quick. All you have to do is grab all this stuff and use the Pathfind Unite. So as soon as you run Pathfind Unite on that guy, if we go back and look at our object here, you can see that it's done a really nice job of that. Now, obviously, there's a couple little points inside of here that I don't want to have. These guys aren't going to do anything good for me. And there's also a couple areas where I know that like this line's really close to each other. So I'm just going to grab that path and sort of overset that guy a little bit. And I'll grab that path and kind of bring that in like that. And now I'm just going to run that Unite command one more time. So let's just kind of zoom out here and grab everybody and rerun that Unite. So with that done, that looks pretty cool. I'm going to change the color on this from this black color to something that's a little bit different, like a dark red, because Maya actually has the ability to get color information. Oops, looks like I didn't grab everything here. Let's just do that again. It has the ability to get color information from the Illustrator file, which I think is super, super cool. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and just look at our wireframe mode one more time here. And there's a few areas that I can see that are still potentially going to give me some issues. So if we kind of zoom in on these guys right here, you can see that this little edge come across. That's just going to insert like a weird crease in that front face. So I want to clean that up by just grabbing these points and kind of stacking them on top of each other. Now, as I'm stacking these guys on top of each other, they're still there, right? Like if I pull this out, it's just points on top of points on top of points. And Maya's not going to like that. So to clean those up, a fast, easy way of doing that is to just rerun that Unite command. The Unite command, when you run it on top of something like that where there's a bunch of points stacked on top of each other, is almost like doing a merge verts inside of Maya. It will clean up all of those points that are stacked on top of each other, and they no longer exist there like that. So that's really pretty cool. So with that done, the next thing that I always like to do on my way out of Illustrator is to grab everything and just go up to the Object Pathfind. Object Path, and under Object Path, I just run a cleanup just to make sure that everything is nice and tidy. And obviously in this file, everything looks pretty cool. So now the final step is to save this out. So we'll do a file save as. We're going to save it as an SVG file. And there's one option that you want to turn on to make sure the color information comes across. So if you go, we'll just use demo F. We'll replace that guy. And you need to go to the advanced options and make sure that presentation attributes is turned on. This is what makes Maya work properly with SVG files, and it helps. It's the only way the color information comes across. So just make sure presentation attributes is turned on, and we'll hit OK on that. So with that done, let's jump over into Maya. And I'm going to be showing this presentation in a little bit in Maya 2017 Update 2, as well as finishing off in Update 3 to show you some improvements that have been made that get around some bugs and some limitations. So pretty straightforward stuff. Let's jump into Maya and bring that SVG file in using the Motion Graphics shelf with the SVG import node. So now that we've done that, we'll just go and say import. And when we bring this guy in, you can see here it comes. And just like that, it looks pretty cool. Now notice that it's got that color information that came across from the Illustrator file. So what happens if I wanted to change the color of this? Like I say, all right, I'm going to assign a new material to this guy. Let's just right mouse click on top of the object here and put a new material on it. So if I say new material and I put a Lambert on there and I start changing the color of this Lambert, you'll notice that nothing's happening. And the reason nothing's happening is because on the SVG import node, underneath the geometry section, you can see that there's output vertex colors. This is really how that SVG information transfers itself onto the mesh. It goes through color per vertex. So if I turn this off, you can see now it's got that shader on there that I was just playing around with, that Lambert material. So pretty straightforward there. I think if I just do a focus on this guy, I can grab that Lambert and obviously start changing that color. So that's pretty cool and pretty straightforward. Now let's go back and get that color per vertex information back on. Now let's assume that I did a duplicate of this guy and I then wanted to apply a material onto this duplicate. And obviously with a duplicate, when I turn off on that SVG node, and we'll just use the focus to get back to it, when I turn off the output colors, it's going to turn off the output colors on the object that has history, but this duplicate that I just made obviously doesn't have any history. So that switch isn't tied into it. How do I get my shader to work on that? Well, if it happens to be in a state where you've done that and you forgot to turn it off before you did the duplicate, all you have to do is go to the shape node for that mesh, go to the mesh component displays, and turn off display color. And that basically turns on and off whether or not color per vertex is being used to shade that in the viewport. So pretty straightforward there. So let's go ahead and delete this guy. We'll get back to this guy, and because I like the color per vertex on, I'm going to turn that back on. So the next thing I want to show you is actually for this specific piece of geometry, a limitation in the SVG importer with the deformation mesh options. So when I turn deformable mesh on, you'll see that it goes through and it triangulates it, but it couldn't perform the poly remesh. If you remember last demo, we talked in depth about the poly remesh node and how awesome it is because it can do things like triangulate your faces without all these long skinny lines. And it lets you really get nice even parameterization to your mesh because it's doing this retriangulation on top of the piece of geometry. And you can see as I move this refine threshold down, it's not having any effect, and that's because that poly remesher failed. The other thing that you'll notice is the edges here, the extrusions, are triangulated as opposed to being quad. So it just couldn't handle this piece of geometry, and this has been improved in update 3 of Maya 2017. So let's check that out. We'll just jump over to another version of Maya. This is update 3 of Maya, so we're going to do that exact same thing. We'll bring in our SVG node. We'll go ahead and we'll import in our piece of geometry. And with our piece of geometry imported in, I'll go ahead and I'll turn on Deformable Mesh. Now, as soon as I do that, you'll notice that the Deformable Mesh tab is it was grayed out until I clicked on the actual viewport. It's a little glitchy there. So when you turn on the Deformable Mesh tab, if you can't move the sliders, just left click in the viewport and it wakes those sliders up. But now that that's done, you can see that I can use this refined mesh to start to adjust how many polygons are getting distributed across those faces. And you can see that it's no longer these long, skinny triangles, which would wreak havoc on things like a cloth solver or lots of times you don't want to have long, skinny triangles. And this deformable mesh action is using that remesh node that we talked about before, and it now works much better in update 3. And then obviously the quads are on the extrusions now as opposed to being triangles. So it's really giving me exactly what I would expect. All right, that's basically it. So that's just a quick example of how we can get vector information out of Illustrator into Maya using the SVG importer. If you're watching this on YouTube or Vimeo, make sure you go back to the area. On the area, there's the Journey to VR blog section. And on that blog, I've recorded lots of other demos in Maya and Max and Unreal, as well as interviewed customers and some of our contractors and getting them to talk about the things that they think are super cool inside of VR. So please take the time to go back to that section. Thanks again so much for watching this, everybody. I hope you're enjoying it. Cheers.